Okay, guys, today we have on Benedict Brady, who I've had on before, but he has now switched careers and is working on a AI/wallet project on Solana. So, yeah, Benedict, welcome. Give us a little rundown of what you're doing now, or maybe, what you were doing prior, and then what you're working on now.
Hey, Gwart, thanks for having me on. As you said before, I spent the past 6 years in quant trading, mostly in the crypto space. The first 3 years, from 2019 to 2022, I was working at a firm called Cumberland DRW, doing mostly what I think of as like the boomer version of crypto quant trading. You're trading Bitcoin OTC to large counterparties. You're trying to improve the spreads. You're market making major assets on large exchanges, kind of all things of this sort. And I was working mostly on the quant trading side of this, the quant research side of this, building out our research stack. After that, kind of at the height of everything in 2022, DRW realized, hey, look, DeFi is really interesting. It's kind of the next frontier of markets. There's a lot of people who are making a lot of money doing this. And the partnership at DRW spun out kind of a sister entity to DRW called Ergonia. Ergonia is a DeFi-focused trading firm that shares some of the same lineage as DRW, but it's kind of set up separately just to capture the opportunities in DeFi. So I helped build out this team for about 3 years. The team, kind of did a variety of things across Ethereum L2s, Solana, kind of eventually the whole stack. I left at the end of December of this year to start Meridian. I'll give you a 2-second overview of Meridian. Meridian is an AI assistant for trading. We think it's basically the next generation in a long line of trading interfaces. Originally you had kind of people trading in the pit and you're calling your broker. Then you go on Fidelity and E-Trade on the web. Then Robinhood kind of moves all this stuff to mobile. And we think kind of the next iteration of this is you have an agent that assists you in kind of whatever trading decisions you want to make, giving you generative personalized interfaces, helping you complete complex tasks, and kind of like following you around to whatever form factor you want. That's the story. And I'm sitting on a lot of kind of prior knowledge of Solana market structure, which I think is kind of the topic of the day.
Yeah, and I think I may have asked you this before, but like going back to your time trading at Ergonia, let's say just like by the end of it, how much of your trading activity was on Solana? Like if you had to give a percentage, it seemed like you were doing, and the reason I ask is because my assumption is that's why you chose to ultimately, work on Solana now or make your application Solana centric. But how much of kind of your activity at Ergonia was focused on Solana specifically?
Yeah, so I think like number one rule of quant trading is you kind of want to go to the markets where retail is the most present. Because retail creates price inefficiencies, and price inefficiencies provides the opportunity to do two things. One is arbitrage between markets, and the other one is market make. These are kind of the two like biggest forms of low latency quant trading stuff. So we started out originally, Ethereum was kind of the hot trade of the day. There were all these block builders, SCP, Wintermute, all these teams were kind of arbitraging the Uniswap pool. And in 2021, 2022, this kind of looked like the trade to do. So we moved over there. We built out some systems on Ethereum. Over time, these L2s started to launch and get a little bit of trading activity. And we started to investigate these things because we're like, okay, some retail is moving to L2s. Like, I'm listening to the ETH influencers and they're all saying L2s are the future of Ethereum. We should really be present on L2s. So we move up the stack to L2s. I think I learned a lot about the pain of L2s from this experience. L2s are very fragmented. It was very hard to kind of rebalance capital. We had weird periods where Arbitrum would go down for like 8 hours or Optimism or these things and cause tons of problems with our system. Anyway, I think the history of this all is in late 2023. Solana became like a huge retail focus for trading. And I was already pretty familiar with Solana. And so Ergonia kind of migrated over to Solana in a big way. I built out a bunch of our initial Solana infrastructure. I think the history of this is basically Jito does some airdrops, spikes a bunch of activity, then the bonk market started to rip. And by January and February, Solana is kind of in full-fledged retail mania. And I think that's kind of like where the story begins of what the Solana market structure looks like. It begins with kind of a little bit of meme coin mania at the beginning of 2024.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. That's like the good segue. And also, I probably should have mentioned this prior, but we wanted to talk about like maybe from when you started and Solana and to where it is now, and like discuss these new dark pools, AMMs. But maybe it is kind of you can go anywhere you want with this question, but like from maybe when you started trading on Solana to now, like how has this market evolved? Like what do you find most fascinating maybe about like the direction of this? And that can kind of lead us into what we're seeing now. And I can start probing about some of these things that I don't understand so well, but hopefully you do.
Yeah, let me give the kind of like long overview of Solana market structure, and you can just interrupt me at whatever point you want. So I think I'm a huge proponent of this kind of new dark AMM concept on chain. And I think like the best way to understand it is to understand why the previous models of trading on chain kind of largely got outcompeted. So the original form of on-chain spot trading looked a lot like basically you have AMMs, then you have people arbitraging the AMMs versus the correct fair prices that were shown on Binance and Coinbase and these other exchanges. And there wasn't really this concept of market makers. There were these passive liquidity providers, and they would kind of get arbitraged all the time. Solana was really the first market where there was an opportunity to do real active liquidity providing. This all started with Serum and then kind of Serum's successor, Phoenix, and also OpenBook to some extent. So basically, when we start trading on Solana at the end of 2023, there are a few different markets. One is Orca and Meridian, which are kind of the AMMs that provide passive liquidity. And then the other one is Phoenix. Phoenix is kind of the natural choice for a market maker because you can show much larger sized, much tighter for traders. And really at that period of time, there was just a massive amount of mania around trading on Solana. So people would come in and buy like $2 million clips of WIF. And if you buy that on Orca, like there's just absolutely no way that an AMM of this style can provide a reasonably tight quote. So it would rip the price like 10% to buy that much size. Whereas what you really want is like somebody to come in and provide that for 1%, 2% to make these markets efficient. So what we started doing is going to these kind of more major, highly traded assets, and we'd provide just like much tighter, deeper liquidity than the AMMs. And as a result, the Jupyter router would kind of route a lot of flow to Phoenix as opposed to Orca and Meridian. And we were just like mostly outcompeting these things on larger sizes of trades. Kind of what ends up happening here is there's gotten two interesting market structure issues that occur. One is the Solana network starts to become very, very congested around March. So from March to May of 2024, it became like nearly impossible to land transactions. So I remember at one period in May, we were sending about 1,000 unique transactions to the Solana blockchain a second, and we're landing somewhere between 2 and 3 on chain. And I was every day in the chat with all the RPC providers saying like, can we try this? Can we try that? We're trying like everything we possibly could, but we're basically just like desperate to provide tight liquidity for retail traders. But still kind of like our orders were falling out of the book all the time. It's actually like worth it to go through this extreme pain to market make if there's enough retail activity to kind of subsidize the demand for this type of stuff. So you can imagine like, say you make like 100K in trading a day, you're paying like 10K, 20K to land on chain. And then maybe you're getting picked off by competitors like Wintermute for 10K, 20K of like negative edge a day because your quotes are public and Wintermute understands how Phoenix works and they're able to kind of like sweep you. And so during this period, everyone kind of who's present on chain, which is really a very small number of people who are super sophisticated doing this stuff on chain, maybe like 3 to 5 very good entities, starts thinking like, okay, what do we really need to do to provide high quality liquidity and to actually like capture the edge of these markets? The first thing you think is, look, it's costing me 200,000, 300,000 compute units, which is kind of like the gas equivalent on Solana, to update my quotes. And this is just like charging me an exorbitant amount of gas. It also makes these transactions look much harder to schedule. So what I really want is like a cheaper way to update my quotes. And the second thing you want is, frankly, you just like want it to be harder for people to pick you off. So if you publish the source code to your exchange, then anyone can just integrate it and sweep your quotes. So as Solana gets fixed over the summer, everyone starts to like think in the back of their head, like, okay, where's this market structure going? Like, can we really provide tight enough liquidity on these clobs to like really win in the limit? And as the retail mania dies down, it starts to become like more and more you're getting picked off by super sharp arbitrageurs, and less like retail is like paying a bunch to trade against you. As a market maker, you want to maximize the ratio of kind of retail flow to toxic flow, because you want to like segment your order flow as well as possible, so that you're able to provide the tightest possible spreads. So I think all this stuff brings us to the fall of 2024, when kind of this new Dark AMM phenomenon emerges. So actually, the funny part about the dark prop AMM, whatever you want to call it, is there was always this exchange called Lifinity sitting around in the background. It's been around since 2021. We used to joke Lifinity was like an on-chain hedge fund that had access to the Jupyter router. They had kind of like one guy was running it, pricing it. He had connected to the Jupyter matching engine. Nobody really knew how to take against the Lifinity exchange. And they were kind of like always really steadily making some money. And I think it's probably fair to say at some point at the end of the summer, a lot of the best teams looked around and said like, hey, that model looks a little bit better than the model that I have. Like, what can we take from this and kind of make it much better? And this is kind of, I think, where SolFi, ZeroFi, and Obrick, the kind of like original triumvirate of Dark AMMs come from. The idea is essentially, instead of publishing the source code, you just give it to Jupyter. You ask Jupyter to integrate against your exchange. You tell Jupyter, hey, look, because this is not open source, I can actually provide much tighter liquidity. I also have this new model where I essentially am going to like provide very, very cheap Oracle updates to this so that my price is always very tight and very close to like what the actual fair value is. And we're going to just try to make it like as hard as possible for the like Wintermute and toxic takers of the world to take against me. And this is actually like net good for retail. So like it's net good because when you segmented out the toxic flow, you can provide tighter prices. And so this brings us to the fall. Kind of SolFi starts to take dominant market share on Solana. And yeah, not to get the story too confusing, but also around this time, in December, Jupyter like starts to come up with another idea for how they're going to provide tighter pricing for their users on chain, which is RFQ. So Jupyter starts kind of like making some noise in the fall about like, we're going to launch this RFQ protocol. All the market makers should get on board. They should get interested in it. We're going to route a significant amount of the retail flow to RFQ. So a lot of the best market making teams kind of scramble to integrate with the Jupyter RFQ. And what emerges out of this spring is basically this equilibrium market where a lot of flow gets routed to the RFQ and then a lot of flow gets routed to the Dark AMMs. So I think that's kind of like the high level overview, and we can take it from there. There's kind of like a lot of subtle nuances about how this stuff gets routed.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, wait. So can you just sort of explain so like an RFQ is like request for quote. Explain why, for example, an order would be routed to the RFQ versus one of these Dark AMMs. Like, I mean, obviously I assume from Jupyter's angle, it's like the tightest, pricing, but explain like how that works, like from your perspective, like where that's kind of like, you said there's an equilibrium kind of playing out now. Like how does that look in practice?
Yeah. So I think the core of the problem here, from a market structure perspective, is that you're balancing kind of this three-legged trade-off space. So one of the things you want to do is provide the tightest price. The other thing you want to do is provide the lowest latency on the fill to the user. And then the last thing you want to do is have kind of like the least variance in the fill. So you don't want to tell the user they're going to get filled at 170 and then accidentally sometimes fill them at like 172. So RFQs are very good on like providing tight prices and providing stable prices. And they're kind of a little bit worse on the latency front. And so Jupyter is kind of trying to balance all these variables at once. So what they're doing is essentially a user comes in and they ask for a trade. Jupyter then goes and queries like all the systems they have access to. One of the systems is like every RFQ quote that they can get. One of the systems is what are all the prices on the prop AMMs. They've also introduced like a meta aggregator function. So they'll also ask like the OKX aggregator and the dflow aggregator, like what is the best price you can show me? Then they make a decision about which price looks the best. And then they just route it to that flow. When they route it to the RFQ, like you mostly just kind of get the price that you think you're going to get. The market maker is like essentially ish obligated to fill you at that price, minus like every so often they can drop the price. And the prop AMMs are a little bit different stylistically because as you request the quote from the prop AMMs, they're updating their pricing like 10 to 20 times a second. And so you can kind of request a price, and then maybe the prop AMM like updates their price a little bit. Maybe it's better, maybe it's worse, but you're kind of introducing a little bit more variability into the fill. And so Jupyter is kind of like trying to balance these two things. And I think my contention is basically that it's incredibly difficult. And there are a lot of kind of existing flaws with how it's being done, but they're kind of like giving it their best effort.
Okay, so I have two questions. One's somewhat naive. Do orders ever get filled with both systems at once? So, like, does an RFQ ever fill partial and then another part gets routed to elsewhere? Or is an RFQ such that you send it, because like I don't pay attention to any of this stuff, right? Is an RFQ such that you send a, like, I want to buy, or I want to spend like 10,000 SOL, okay? And that RFQ has to fill the entire order at some given price, give or take a little, like you said.
Jupyter is looking into this concept called partial RFQ fills, which would allow you to kind of split the order up. So there's one technical constraint with RFQs on chain that I think is like a little bit underthought about, which is essentially the way that an RFQ works is you ask for a quote from Jupyter. Jupyter asks the market maker sends you back a quote. Then you sign a transaction that says like, okay, I want to do this. And then Jupyter sends it to the market maker, who then also has to sign the transaction. And then the market maker lands it on chain. So this allows the market maker to have like a last look function. Now, Jupyter tries to enforce that the market maker doesn't abuse the last look by asking them like, you need a 95% fill rate. So this is like the mechanism that they have to try to stop you from essentially dropping a lot of quotes. But even if you do fill the quote, it's adding like one extra hop of latency into the system.
Got it.
And the other problem with it is it destroys this kind of like notion of atomic composability on chain. So you can't do like atomic arbitrage between an RFQ bot and an on-chain DEX, because you kind of have to do this weird communication protocol. And so this is why like decomposing the RFQ into multiple fills like becomes a little bit more difficult. But still, what you can kind of do is just split the user transaction up into a bunch of transactions and then like kind of try to get them partial fills.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, and then the other thing, okay, so like explain to me how these dark AMMs work in the background, because we were talking about this a bit beforehand and I was questioning like, what does this mean? Because a lot of us, I say a lot of us, like maybe people listening to this, right? When we think AMM, we think of, I don't know, Uni V2 or something, right? Like, and a very simple like X, Y equals Q type model. And I think this is more complex probably. And there's, like you were saying before, you know, like this maybe something somewhere in between like an AMM and an order book. Like how, to the extent that you know what's going on in the background, like what do these actually look like in practice?
Yeah. So I think an interesting thing that I hadn't really thought about until last year was order books are just like a little bit inefficient to traverse. And so you have an order book and it has like a ton of state in it. It has a ton of price levels. And so when you want to update a quote on an order book, it has to like walk the entire order book, figure out if that's a reasonable quote, like update some state in some really complicated tree. And even if you have like Jerry, the smartest on-chain engineer ever designing it, it's still like a bit inefficient. And it costs like hundreds of thousands of CUs to update like 10 orders on an order book. Now you can kind of think a little bit more from first principles about what is liquidity. Liquidity is kind of just a preference curve of how much you're willing to trade at what price. And so an order book is kind of a crude way to express your preference curve of, I want to buy a little bit at this tight, and then I want to buy a little bit more at this tight, and a little bit more at like a bit wider. So one thing you can think about is, hey, I could probably express this with just a curve. Like I can say, hey, I'm going to update like 3 or 4 values in my system, and these values are going to kind of spell out a curve. And then when a user wants to do a swap, they can kind of compute how much that I'm willing to trade at a given price using kind of the curve that I've specified. So what this allows you to do is basically just very, very quickly update a small number of integers in your contract, and that will allow you to kind of specify how much you're willing to trade. And then another nice thing you can do from this is these things just have way less state. And this allows users to essentially update, or this allows market makers to update a ton of markets at the same time. So if you're just kind of like changing a few bits in memory to say like, hey, here's where I want to trade, you can update 10, 20 markets at the same time, as opposed to updating like one order book, and running into all these kind of like constraints of contract size.
Got it. Okay. So, but then, like, again, so this may sound somewhat naive, but when we say dark, right, like my understanding of dark in the traditional sense, like let's say TradFi, is that there's these pools that if you wanted to like trade very large size, you would, it wouldn't be like, broadcast to the entire like world, right? Explain that in the context of dark AMMs or dark pools. Like, how does this compare roughly? My understanding is that it's like, when we say dark in this context, it means it's just going to that specific contract or whatever. Is that like roughly correct?
Yeah, I think the reason that the dark nomenclature took off, which the nomenclature around this stuff is a little bit screwed up. But the reason
and
it
also
took off
we're
is,
like we're like winging it on the spot. Like we're like, we're definitely making this up as we go. So that could be partial.
Some people in the Solana world are trying to call them prop AMMs because I think it's like a little bit more professional. I think dark AMM sounds cooler. But whatever. Dark AMMs. The reason that they're dark is because they're not exposing how the swap logic works to anybody outside of the AMM or outside of the router. And so the reason that this is beneficial, and also the reason why this is like a little bit like dark foresty, is because it's very hard to interact with these contracts if you don't go through the router. So if you want to just like directly call Humidify or Solidify, you don't actually know the contract interface. So you don't know, you can kind of try to guess it by looking at the transactions, but it's very hard to like interact naively with the contracts. And this is obviously on purpose. Like they don't want you to basically be a really sophisticated quant trader person and come in like directly integrate with the contract and then just like sweep it all the time. And there's like GitHub repos of people trying to reverse engineer them and like all this nonsense. But basically they're hard to understand. And then they also can just be upgraded probably. So like,
unilaterally,
marginator can just kind of change it. So if you think you're taking it this way and then they just change it, like you're screwed basically. So they make it dark on purpose. And the other thing it allows them to do is like, it's much harder to trade against something that you don't understand. So it just makes everyone's life a lot harder. So what it's developed is like this cottage industry of people trying to essentially sweep these dark AMMs through the routers. And it looks kind of like this cat and mouse game where you're a Wintermute and you dress up as a retail trader and you go and you try to pretend like you're a Jupyter transaction, and Jupyter has like an API. So this is kind of not that hard. And you send an order and like, then the person is the market maker is like, wait, what the fuck? Wintermute's trading against me. Like, what can I do to make it harder for them? And like, there's kind of just like this perpetual cat and mouse game. It's like super unclear to me where the stable equilibrium is of this. But essentially like the takers are trying to pretend like the retail, and then the market makers are trying to like essentially discriminate against like non-retail trades as much as they possibly can. And the interesting thing here is Jupyter like has a ton of power in this situation. Jupyter is essentially like the matching engine for the exchange. And so kind of whatever rules Jupyter allows, like will fly. So you could imagine a system like people tried to build these systems in the early days of DeFi where it's like, okay, you have to have a signature that says that you're coming from a mobile device, and then that signature is verified on chain, and so you kind of can discriminate in this way. So Jupyter could build any of these types of systems, but it's just kind of like whatever rules they allow, then people have to follow them, and then they just try to essentially provide the best liquidity conditional on the rules that Jupyter puts forward.
Yeah, that's actually a slight tangent I wanted to ask you about. It seems like this whole time, like for the past 25 minutes, we've been talking about like this market structure, and almost everything comes back to Jupyter. And I'm curious maybe your thoughts on this. And also, is there some escape velocity that Jupyter has reached? I mean, it from this conversation, right? Like if you had an AI listen to this conversation, I think it would say that like clearly Jupyter has like some like outsized role in the ecosystem. Like why is that? And like what does this mean for kind of like the future of Solana? Like is everything just essentially
whatever Jupyter allows?
Yeah. Like what does this mean?
Yeah. I think it gets back a little bit to, frankly, why I'm building Meridian and why a lot of people are very interested in trading front ends nowadays. And it's purely because the person who controls the order flow kind of sets the rules of the road for everything that happens downstream. So Jupyter has access to a ton of order flow. Also, people who aren't Jupyter use Jupyter's router. And because of this, they've kind of become enshrined as like this very important, too big to fail. Now, what you start to observe as you look into this data a little bit more is that the different order flow sources like understand that Jupyter is imperfect in certain ways, and they try to kind of hedge their bets a little bit. So I've been recently looking a bit into like the Phantom order flow. Phantom is actually a huge originator of retail order flow. Like that's, I guess, obvious to most people, but it's like quite large if you look at this data. And Phantom is like trying to diversify away from Jupyter. So when a trade comes into Phantom, they will route some of it to Jupyter, some of it to DFlow, some of it to OKX. They'll route some of it to Phantom's own custom RFQ. So kind of like every single order flow provider is now trying to like run their own internal auctions, and it gives them a lot of power over the downstream market makers, where they can kind of like squeeze these guys, try to compress the margins, try to make the prices more efficient so they can capture more of the margin. It's funny because like we're talking about a small number of basis points, and Phantom is like charging 85 basis points on the swaps. It's only a small amount of margin, but when you're running a business on the scale of Phantom, like you care a lot about squeezing 2 more basis points out of the trade. I think what it means is, frankly, it would be nice if there's like a bit more standardization here. This equilibrium where we have every single market maker runs their own contract, everybody has to integrate against every single contract. It's kind of a little bit opaque, like who gets integrated and who doesn't get integrated. And it's like mostly based on the bandwidth of the team to integrate them. And this is, I think, eventually going to become an unstable equilibrium. But the thing that you realize trading on chain and kind of just trading in general is all the money is made before the market hits the perfect equilibrium. So like you want to essentially just adapt to whatever the paradigm is, and then like as it changes, you change.
The Gwart Show is sponsored by Ellipsis Labs, who I've been following for 3 years now. They are one of the strongest teams I know in crypto. Ellipsis Labs is a small engineering team with a flat structure. They build complex systems, primarily in Rust. For engineers who like challenges, here's the kind of problem they solve. A layer 2 blockchain needs to maintain 100 million accounts and generate a state root after each transaction batch. The root must be built within 50 milliseconds. How would you design a system to ensure the root construction is fast enough? High-performance challenges are core to Ellipsis Labs' mission as they build modern crypto finance. They believe finance needs more than an upgrade. It needs a complete rewrite. The success of their first product, Phoenix V1, speaks for itself, doing over $70 billion in organic trading volume. Now, Ellipsis Labs is building Atlas, the blockchain purpose-built for verifiable finance. I know this team personally, and I like them because they're unique in the crypto space. They have a long-term focus, they work in person from their New York City headquarters, and they're here to build products that fundamentally change the world of finance. If you want to learn more about their open roles, go to ellipsislabs.xyz/careers. Okay, so I wanted to go back to something you said. Like I'm quite a fan of these dark pools, and I wanted to ask what that meant. But I think I understand. Well, I think I understand the impetus for that statement, and I heard Max talking about this recently when he was saying, I think this is in the same vein, which is that this is sort of the first time that, I don't know first time, but maybe he said first time, that we've been able to kind of embed trading logic into a smart contract. And like, I that was somewhat lost upon me what that meant, but I guess the essence is, and then I saw you also tweet something along the lines of like, this is only possible really within like a permissionless kind of open system. So like what is the, like, what's the real unlock here, right? Like, so now that we have kind of a general understanding of how these things work and like what's going on, like, what do you view as the big unlock, and like maybe why are you specifically like a big fan? Is it just because it provides much better execution probably?
Yeah. So when you're trading in traditional finance, you can imagine an exchange like the CME, and the CME builds a matching engine. They build an order book, and it's there for 20 years. And it's just like, these are the rules. You place orders at these levels. These are the order types you have access to. If you're like the biggest trader on the CME, you can ask them to change one of the order types, maybe. But in general, they're kind of like this immovable object. What this unlocks is for the first time, you can kind of essentially just do things that are crazier than order books. You can provide liquidity in like wackier looking curves. You can kind of try to embed some interesting like logic about how the swaps work. You can, so I'll take a step back. So one thing that people early in DeFi tried to do is they tried to make order books like a little bit more programmable. So the idea was basically, what if after you traded against a price level in an order book, you could add some like callback function on chain, where imagine an order where you're like buying at 170, but then after you buy it, like flips it to like a sell at 168 atomically. And so you kind of have this weird like conditional programmability on top of the order book. And there were actually a bunch of companies that got funded, like trying to basically build slightly more programmable order books. And I think the rising dark AMMs is saying like, that's a little too cute. Kind of what you want to do is just like let the market maker write whatever liquidity curve they want to write. And then just like we'll integrate against that liquidity curve. And just give them like as many degrees of freedom as you want, because the degrees of freedom allow them to kind of quote more tightly.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. All right. I feel like we have a very good understanding. Well, at least I feel to the extent that I could, I have a decent understanding of what's going on. What are the kind of like most interesting observations you've had maybe now spending a few months like looking at this stuff? Does anything stand out where you're like, wow, this is like quite fascinating and I need to share this on Gwart's podcast?
What alpha can I drop on Gwart's podcast?
Yeah.
I mean, I think the conversation that I'm interested in that's going on a little bit in the background in the Solana cabal world is like, can we make these? So one really nice property of order books is everybody puts their liquidity into one contract, and then you only interact with one contract, and you kind of have these guarantees as you trade on chain that like there's what you call like price priority. And so if somebody has an order that's better than the other person's order at the time the transaction lands, it will trade against that order. There's like much less guarantees when you're interacting with 20 disparate contracts that you're actually going to get like the very best fill. And so there's this interesting question of, can we take the best of both of these approaches? Can we make really easy to update, really cheap, like sub 1,000 KCUs liquidity curves to update, but then can we kind of aggregate them all into one contract, allowing the traders to have like enough flexibility to do kind of whatever type of order flow discrimination that they want to do, and also allow for this property where you kind of just, you show up, and if you want to integrate, you integrate like the super dark AMM contract. The super dark AMM contract is tradable and has like a bunch of kind of pricing guarantees. Now maybe the traders don't love this idea because a lot of the alpha of this stuff obviously comes before everything gets super standardized. But I think like as an aggregator, this is like a very interesting direction to try to ask people to move in, because it's just like much more standardized.
You see one of our friends talk about how there are 1 BIP spreads on big pairs on Solana, and but not just our friend. There's a lot of people basically claiming that there's tighter spreads on Solana and multiple pairs perhaps on Solana than on centralized exchanges. From what you've done in terms of research, like, would you back up this claim, or would you kind of qualify it with many different would you add a lot of qualifications
I would say
into
the
this?
build quality is like still a bit too variable.
Yeah.
And I think actually it's not clear to me how much of this is router problems versus liquidity problems. Like the liquidity on chain appears to be quite good. But the router can, so you can imagine a problem with a model like how the routers work now. So say Tessera is quoting really, really, really tight for like $100,000 of SOL. And 5 users for some reason show up and they want to sell $100,000 of SOL. So they all show up, they all request a quote, and Jupyter says, all of you guys are going to Tessera. So the first guy gets a great fill. The second guy gets a worse fill because all the liquid is gone. The third guy gets like a way worse fill. And then by the 5th guy, he's like getting a horrible fill because they all got routed to the same DEX, and the DEX probably didn't have enough time to like update in between all 5 of these orders coming through. So like in the limit, this like routing algorithm leads to some weird effects where you can see kind of just like some spiky fills. I think the other, there's like a lot of interesting embedded PvP stuff going on here. So like there's kind of a contingent that likes the RFQ system and a contingent that likes the Dark AMM system. And they're both kind of like arguing that the RFQ gets better fills, or like the Dark AMM gets better fills. I've started to poke around this a little bit more. It's like, it's not totally clear to me which one is better yet. I think you should expect on Solana, if you're trading under $1 million, to get like in the range of 5 basis points or less on your fill, kind of whether you're going to the RFQ or the Dark AMM in general. Obviously with this like kind of embedded volatility. I would still say it hasn't like fully surpassed finance or any of these things.
Yeah, what is the
it's like
what is
getting
the
better.
comparable on Binance? Just because I don't trade on Binance, like what would you expect to
Binance
get?
is maybe like 2 to 3 basis points, maybe 2 basis points. It's a very tight market, and then there's also this like, not to get too down in the weeds of this stuff, but there is like we like to talk about like where the equilibrium net's out here. There's a bunch of guys who just started doing dark AMMs, and they're all trying to quote really tight, and like over time the takers are going to get smarter and the spreads are going to widen out. So they're kind of like, it's at like a locally like very, very tight spot. I think probably slowly like the toxic side of the world gets like a little bit better. Or you imagine, like, this is the thing that Max frets about a lot, but like, what if the validator starts to decide like, we're going to censor Oracle AMM, Dark AMM updates, and then we're going to sweep the Dark AMMs. It's like trading on chain is just the infinite, like the ultimate PvP game where you figure out some edge to get your quotes really tight, and then somebody figures out some weird gap in your system, and they like have some validator monopoly or something, and they sweep you.
Yeah, you were making I saw you tweet that like you trade on chain long enough and you realize like Wintermute's everywhere. Is Wintermute like one of the biggest actor on Solana, and like to the extent that you can name others, like who are the big market makers on Solana, like from at least
I mean,
research?
Ergonia is still very present. Wintermute was traditionally very large in the taking space. They were kind of like the huge headache. They were like people who kind of like were frankly like widening out the spreads for everybody on most of like the meme coin volatility in 2024. There's a firm called Winsent that's in Asia that's gotten quite large on Solana. There are kind of a few more like Solana native teams that everybody knows about that are like probably trading. There's obviously the Ellipsis team that's pretty good. Wintermute has started to get more into the market making business. They run one of the unnamed mystery dark AMMs as well, and they're like reasonably good at it. Wintermute is everywhere. They're just like clinical at DeFi. They just jump into every market and they compete the spreads down in a like incredibly annoying way.
Why is there this like, oh, we can't name names? And I'm not asking you to name names. I'm more asking, why can't we name names? Like, why is there this opacity? Why is there this, hush hush around these dark AMMs? Who's behind it? Like, who's making, who's taking, like all of these things? It's so bizarre, right? You saw the same thing for a while in Ethereum, for what it's worth, with Beaver and Wintermute and like SCP
and all these guys
and like who's Jared from Subway, like all these same, right? We all had these same like things. It's running the same like playbook, I would say, but it's weird. It's like, why don't you just say it? It's like all this like little back and forth on Twitter. It's like, what are you guys doing? Just like, either stay out of it altogether or just say it. There's like this weird, in between where I don't know. It's like quite bizarre, right? Like,
I think it is true. I'll say my history with this stuff is like when I got into this space in 2023, I was obsessed with figuring out who was behind every address, and I like had a whole dictionary, and I was like, this is this guy, and I think this is this guy, and like people would come on, I try to like pick up on the rumors. It makes trading like substantially more fun, because when you're trading in traditional markets, you kind of just don't know who the other people are for the most part. Sometimes you can figure some things out in some OTC markets, but for the most part, you're kind of trading against this like blind morass of traders who you're like, they must be smarter than me. But then when you like figure out who somebody is, and you're like, oh, it's that guy, and like I hung out with him last week. It adds this like whole new dimension to the trading problem. Why are people cagey about it? I think it's just like, it's a little bit of this weird social norm of on-chain where it is actually just fully transparent, but people want to pretend like it's private. And so they feel a little bit uncomfortable saying like, oh, I found so-and-so's wallet, and like, I'm going to tweet it out, and like now everybody can see what they're doing. Most of the ways that people come into this information is like somebody kind of makes a mistake, or like they do a transfer between two addresses that like you kind of know are related, or like the information just like slowly disseminates because you have to kind of talk to a lot of people. But yeah, why is it that people don't want to talk about it? I think it's mostly just nobody wants to piss anyone off in a huge way. And like, you can, if you're like, I'm this guy, and then everyone's like, oh, I'm smarter than you, I'm going to figure out how to take your contract. Like, I'm going to figure out how to like pick you off. Like, it is just really at the end of the day, it's positive some in the sense that retail is getting slightly better spreads, but it's very like zero sum in the sense that somebody is making money and somebody is losing money.
Yeah. Related, what is the kind of state from, at least again, your research observations as of late? Like, what's the state of MEV? Like, I don't know, is there a lot of sandwiching still going on? Is like, how much has that improved or worsened, or where is it like shifted to? What are you seeing there?
Yeah. I used to say in 2023, when we were hiring for Ergonia originally, I was like, there was the first stage of Mev, which was all of these kind of scrappy little MIT kids who figured out how to write a cool Solidity contract, and they were running atomic arbitrage, and they'd look deeply into some weird contract on Avalanche, and they'd figure out, oh, it can be like arbitrage in this fancy way. And it was really kind of like this backyard operation. And there was a really actually very small number of super professional teams. And as with everything trading, it turns out that like knowing how to trade is more important than knowing the exact minutia of everything on chain. Just knowing how to like price things well and knowing how kind of markets work is a lot of alpha. And so over time, you see kind of these trading firms that are real trading firms start to just like eat out more and more of the profit. And I think we're kind of on this like long arc of basically Citadel and Jump and Jane Street and all these people just kind of like coming in and making most of the money here. They just like know how to think about these problems like in a much more sophisticated way than everyone else. And that was like originally the thesis of Ergonia, which was, hey, let's get some DeFi ninjas in the same room as a bunch of people who kind of just traditionally did quant trading. And I think this is also just like the massive edge of Wintermute in this space. In terms of sandwiching, I think the market that I'm not super involved with, but that I think is probably one of the more interesting ones, is this kind of like meme coin sniping space. So there's a lot of the users in this space have like incredibly strange requirements for their trading. Like I met a kid who I met Gwart, and Gwart's a 19-year-old Axiom trader. And he's probably doing $2 million on Axiom a day. He's sniping 30K market cap meme coins and trying to catch them as runners to 600K or something. He trades 16 hours a day. He's profitable. And he had no idea that Axiom had a fee on their trades. And the reason that he likes Axiom is because Axiom has a thing called turbo mode. And turbo mode is basically Axiom will way, way, way overcharge you on the transaction fee. And then they'll just capture it themselves. And then they'll use whatever transaction fee they need to land you on chain really quickly. And it'll just like keep the rest. And so there's kind of this like new form of profit that these Axiom and other trading bot style things are doing, which is one, overcharging the trader for the fee. The second one is the traders care way more about speed than they care about anything else. And so they'll just let you get sandwiched if it gets you on chain faster. They'll kind of go to like whatever length it takes, and they care almost zero about execution quality. And so this is kind of, I think, probably actually where most of the money is being made, and not Dark AMMs. But it's just like much speedier.
Yeah. Well, also, it's kind of hilarious. You're talking about you could trade probably up to $1 million now on Solana. Like maybe on one of the bigger pairs, but you could probably trade $1 million and get within like, I don't know, 5 bips. That's insane. Like progression of crypto as a whole relative to 2 or 3 years ago, and you're getting sandwiched for 20% on some it's just in like you have to look and be like, wow, we've really come a long way, guys. Like I'm proud of everyone.
We really have. I think if you're trading through Jupyter and Phantom, you are very low likelihood to get sandwiched, which is quite cool. At least on the major assets like Solana and these types of things. Like for the most part, people have gotten very good at like kind of playing the sandwiching game. And it really has like moved down to these just incredibly low information, crazy pumped out fund style traders.
But like even the Telegram bots, like even the Telegram bots will just not fill you. They'll just be like, you were gonna get wrecked too hard. We decided against it, and a lot of times I'm like, hang on, I don't mind like taking a 25%
I don't mind
haircut.
getting
Like,
wrecked.
I got a runner. This is a runner.
Dude,
Why would you
1,000x? Like
exactly? But it is it is quite fascinating now. I mean, it does seem like there's been a lot of progress made there. But I do think, I mean, it seems like these Telegram bots still are like eating pretty well, and then like you said, the Axiom traders, I guess. But like, do you see that being? Well, actually, we can pivot slightly. Like, what are you trying to do with Meridian? Like, I don't have all that much context. We haven't really talked about that at all.
Before we jump into that, I actually want to ask you a question about this. You're kind of famously Bitcoiner at heart. I know that you're a little bit of a trader on the side. You dabble. Is your heart in the like DeFi thing? Are you, this is the cool development, like this is kind of the future where everything is going? Or are you just like, DeFi is kind of this fun offshoot of crypto, but I don't don't assign any like moral weight to it?
I think maybe my opinions have changed a little bit. Well, I need to give some context. Like, I think a lot of where I came from initially was, and also why I kind of got, I don't want to say nerd sniped, like semi-nerd sniped by MEV for like 6 months, is because I was genuinely interested in like, okay, is there a way to trade in a decentralized way? Like, can you put all these, like, making this very reductive, like, can you put a bunch of nodes, computers around the world, and can you trade in a better way than traditional finance? And like, my thought was no. And so that's often why I was trolling, like, why does it need to be, like, why are we trading on a blockchain? Like, why does something need to be on a blockchain, right? Like, this is uniquely designed to be one of the most inefficient systems, right? Like no, seriously. Like, I think this is lost upon, like, especially one of the, like, the new age, right? Like, these are purposefully built to be one thing, really, which is censorship resistant, like in theory, right? And like everything else is just a cumbersome, annoying database to deal with. And so my assumption was always like, this is never going to end up on a blockchain. And then over time, I don't know that I've necessarily changed that opinion as much as I've decided, like, that, what's that quote? It's like, the purpose of a system is what it does. Eventually, I came to this realization. I think stable coins actually were sort of the most elucidating thing for me, because I always thought with stable coins, look, USDT and like Circle and Tether are the ones that issue these things. There are so many better ways from like database management perspective to just issue people these things and not require this distributed nodes around the world. Like, you can do this in a much simpler way, and you can actually do it in a more private way. Like, there's the eCash, for example. Like, you can just mint people tokens, and they can already censor you on a blockchain. Why aren't they just the issuers? But then stablecoins sort of continue to gain traction. And I came to the realization, it's like, well, why are stablecoins on the blockchain? It's like, well, that's where we put them. Like, there's no better explanation. And it's like, if this is how it's going to be, then this is how it's going to be. And I think that the benefits to taking stablecoins and doing them off a blockchain now are not strong enough to, I think there's reason now for them to be on blockchains. And that was a bit of a like long, inarticulate way to say that there are, like, I've come to terms with, okay, this is where people are trading. So like, that's where we should put the assets. And I kind of have come to agree. And I think you said this the other day. It's actually going to be one of my questions. So it's kind of a good like segue. Like, you made this point about composability. And I think I'm more and more in agreement about that. I can't put my finger on exactly what it means, but I do think that like a composable ledger where you can have all of these different assets and you can like borrow against your Apple shares on something, and you can go and pay for something over here. There is value in that. Like, the blockchain aspect, okay, I'm still up in the air about, but
the permissionless open ledger is cool.
Yeah. And but like, also then, this is kind of, like I said, this is a good segue into this question. Like, did you kind of conclude that the best chance at doing this was Solana versus Ethereum and the other chains you worked on?
Yeah. I guess a little bit of kind of why I've started Meridian this way is essentially, I think the first most important problem is like where are the best assets issued and where is kind of there the most retail activity. So there just really is not that much interesting stuff happening on chain on Ethereum or the L2s. In my opinion, like it's just does not have like, is not captured the zeitgeist. And it also has like a lot of kind of performance trade-offs. I think in the broadness of time, the goal with Meridian is to allow people to kind of access whatever part of a financial system that they want. So I actually think this is kind of the coolest part of AI systems is they abstract over a lot of the embedded complexity of the system. So like a perfect application of Meridian in the future would be essentially you want to buy something on a different chain. You tell the chat like, hey, I want to buy this asset on Base. And the agent just reasons about like, how do I get assets from Solana to Base and then like buy this thing. So I think weirdly, an incredibly like elegant and sophisticated interface performs better when the actual underlying system is crazier and worse and more fragmented because you're offering more value to the user. My insight early on about this topic with respect to Solana was it's kind of weird how when you want to trade, you go to like the Jupyter front end. And then if you want to borrow and lend, you go to the Camino front end. And then if you want to do something else, you go to another front end. If you want to bridge, you go here. And it's like people have kind of tried to build super apps. But the problem is like nailing the UX for it is a little bit tricky. Whereas if you just kind of expose a lot of functionality as, oh, this is like a tool that your like AI assistant can use, it feels like, I think, a lot more natural to essentially just go to a one-stop shop for everything that you want. And over time, like I want this to be a one-stop shop where you can trade assets on Solana, you can trade stocks, you can trade whatever you want on Hyperliquid. Like we kind of like slowly want to eat all of these like different verticals. And yeah, Solana has a lot of really nice properties that I like. One is I really know how to build on it. And the other one is it has a lot of retail users. And both those things are like a great place to start.
Hey, Will here with Blockspace Media. Did you know that we have individual feeds for all our shows? If you're watching the Mining Pod, Bitcoin Season 2, or the Gwart Show, be sure to check out the individual feeds. You can find them on your podcast player of choice, whether that be Spotify, Apple, YouTube, etc. Just type in Blockspace Media and you'll find all our shows pop up, or just type in the individual show name like the Mining Pod or Bitcoin Season 2. Be sure to hit that subscribe and give us a 5-star rating so we can continue to bring you the best content in Bitcoin.
What do you think about some of the proposed, changes? Like I want to ask specifically about, I don't know what it's called now because I think everybody has a different name for it, but like application specific sequencing, application controlled execution. Like, I don't know if they're all the same thing or not, but like roughly my understanding is, okay, the app gets to decide the ordering. Like if we all agree that there's some like obvious clear value in the ordering and the execution, right? This has been Solana's sort of, I would say like one of their, arguments all along. What do you think about some of the proposals for Solana? And also, does that detract at all from the notion that Solana in aggregate should be the big execution engine, right? And now it's sort of, I think there is some
these weird threads and I'm really not sold on this. I think it's basically a misread of why Hyperliquid is successful to say like Hyperliquid has application-specific sequencing. It's like Hyperliquid is still a very good product built by a very good team. And the like cancel priority thing is like slightly overblown in the grand scheme of like why did Hyperliquid succeed in the limit. I think basically a lot of that application-specific sequencing has come because Solana is just very interested in having a successful perp DEX. And the second that you dig into how do you build a perp DEX on Solana, I looked at basically all of the perp DEXs on Solana last year. It's really quite difficult. You just have to deal with like so much more complicated state. You have to get these oracles to land fast. You have to get the liquidator to land fast. You have to, like the market makers have like way more accounts that they have to touch. You have to track like people's margin and all of these really complicated things. And the Solana team has felt that like the way to push this forward is application specific sequencing. I think like it might work just kind of locally for a perp DEX that kind of doesn't really matter that much if it's composable. Perp DEX is still like the least interesting application for composability. But I think in general, application-specific sequencing breaks just generic composability, because you can imagine an issue where like you want to trade between the Jupyter router and the dflow router, and you want to do an arbitrage, and the dflow router says like this transaction should go at the top of the block, and the Jupyter router says this transaction should go at the bottom of the block, and it's like, okay, it's just impossible to reconcile. Like you need to essentially build this hierarchy of programs, and so what you end up doing is just kind of like separating out all the state. And this is like maybe okay for one really narrow application that's like essentially functions as an L2 that's on chain. But it kind of like doesn't work in the fullness of we want to have this just like one giant massive state machine.
So do you think then that the idealized Perp DEX on Solana, like if you had to sort of, you know, back of the napkin, like think one through, is it roughly an L2 in practice?
Yeah, I've kind of come around to this thing that like it probably looks like a half L1 L2. There are a few transactions that you need to land, and they just like have to be very timely, and which means you need to control a bit of your own sequencing. And the second that you control your own sequencing, you're kind of building an L2 in like without calling it an L2.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I think it's headed, because I think Solana just like cares a lot about this application. And it's probably for good reason. Like you should be driven by like what users demand.
Yeah, but I guess maybe the argument, and I don't even know if this is technically true, but I guess maybe the argument is that is there a way to do this such that you don't incur the same complexity of bridging?
Yeah,
right? Like,
that's the key. I think it's basically like an L2 that settles every block or something.
Yeah. Is that like a big, would that be a reasonable, like, let's call it happy medium between the, you know, proper, like essentially entirely separate chain L2 design that Ethereum's gone with, versus, just like Hyperliquid?
Yeah, you deposit into some contract. It has the same block explorer, the same wallets work. Once you deposit into the contract, your funds are like a bit isolated from the perspective of sequencing. Like I think this thing is basically like the deposit motion is like very similar to bridging. It's just like a lot. You can kind of just make it a lot cleaner. I think I think like most of these, I guess this gets me back to like why I think the front end space is interesting. But like most of these are just product problems. They're not really like these. They're kind of deep tech problems, but a lot of it is like, can you abstract over this complexity in a clean way?
Yeah, for sure. What else, like in terms of working with Solana, what do you think are some obvious improvements? Like I know like Max is, you know, pedal to the metal on you know, making this
multi-proposer and all this stuff.
Yeah.
The thing that annoys me the most as a user is we just need like more and more block space. Like I think Solana should just try to like shrink the block times and increase the block space as much as possible. And I think this gets you like 90% of the way. Solana was like, Anatoly would get on podcasts in 2018 and say, Solana is so great because as compute scales up, like Solana will scale up. And then they set the limit at 48 million CUs and they didn't change it for 6 years as like we went through the most massive global influx of compute like of all time. So you just want to like actually honor what you said initially, which is we just want to make the block space more abundant. And Solana, like you should be able to have $10 like trade on these things, and like it should be sub-cent to land a transaction reliably.
Yeah. What do you make of is it called BAM?
I think it's an interesting direction. I'm stepped away a little bit from the like deep how does the sequencing stuff work. But I think the Jito guys are essentially just trying to move to like a more decentralized, slightly more programmable system here, and they have like the most incredible like validator base of people that run Jito, and I think they're like very good at kind of serving both the application customer, but then also keeping all the validators on board and excited about the product they're shipping. And this is kind of like the key to owning the sequencing layer is like the validators are kind of your customer, but then also like you want to stay Solana aligned, so you want to do the things that are best for applications, even though applications kind of like don't really pay you very much right now, and like they need to essentially hold on to their market share as strongly as possible while also doing the things that like the Solana higher ups like think are important, and also that like they think are important for the long-term health of the network. And I think they're like the best in the biz at balancing this like relatively complicated trade-off.
Yeah. This is maybe more of an ideological question though, and we can kind of wrap up soon, but we were talking about Jupyter earlier and how it's like, it seemed like in terms of trading, everything is more or less relying on Jupyter and how they decide like some of their like what's seemingly innocuous decisions can make a huge impact on, you know, like who gets the flow and like where's the money made. So Jupyter is an example. Helios, RPCs, Jito. Does it feel that like, do you have any concern? I'm not trying to like make you be a concern troll here, but like, do you have any concern that, you know, with something like Solana, you get a lot of this stuff requires a very high level of sophistication, and a lot of it is very complex. And there's sort of like these runaway, like escape velocity type applications where it does become very hard to compete. And like you as a builder, like just starting up, right? You want some of the flow, like you want your users' transactions to be able to land, like you want to be on good terms with the RPC and the block builder and like the various exchanges. Like, do you see any sort of, I don't know, consolidation of power? And like, I don't know, does this like concern you at all? Maybe not for the time being, but like going forward where it just becomes like this whole idea of like permissionless building becomes increasingly difficult on the grounds that, well, like a lot of these things are functionally enshrined almost, you know?
Yeah. It's an interesting question. I will say like my journey of thinking about how do you kind of like build an interesting and differentiated application in Solana world was I started out by saying, hey, look, I understand the market structure really well. One thing that I could provide to users is like just a better router or a more sophisticated execution, like all these types of things. And you kind of slowly start to realize that users don't always think like that. Like you can say I have the best execution, but if they just always go to Jupyter, they're going to just kind of always go to Jupyter. And you need kind of to differentiate on some additional access, which is like we provide you just a much more interesting trading experience that just feels like totally different and way smarter, way more personalized, like way more fluid. I think I'll address the like centralization thing, but I think like the key thing that I've observed kind of working in crypto for a while is that there just aren't as many good product teams in crypto as there are in just like generic, you can hit with a stone in SF, which is where I am right now. Like there's just a lot of people in SF who are very, very, very good at thinking about product. And I think Solana would genuinely be a bit more decentralized, maybe if there were kind of like just a lot more good product teams. The Phantom team kind of came in, they're like traditional product guys, they worked at Twitter and stuff, and they just came in and were like, how do we build a great product? And they built it, and like kind of there aren't.
Do you think Phantom's a great product? Do you think Phantom's a great product? You don't have to respond if you don't want to, but I'm curious.
I actually think they just really solved a lot of people's problems. Like it is super easy to download. The mobile app is clean. It's kind of simple to navigate around. They obviously are like, they have some problems. But in general, they were like much better than what came before. They kind of just like massively took a step up on product from MetaMask. And you're kind of like, you're benchmarked against like when you broke in.
Okay. Like compared to MetaMask,
like,
yes.
If you used like Axiom, not to pick on Axiom again, but like you open up this app and I opened it up and there's a search bar at the top that says like search some assets, and I type in USDC. The first 10 USDC options are all scams, and it's like it's USDC. Like, why is this just hard coded somewhere? Like, what algorithm are we running to like? It's impossible to tell from the UI which one is a scam, which one's not. It's like Phantom has solved problems like that for real.
Yeah, and also if you ever used like Solet, remember that?
Yeah,
that was insane.
A lot of this stuff is like totally like I like a little story from Ethereum world back when I was trading on Ethereum much more. We would use like. So 1inch has better pricing than Uniswap because it incorporates Uniswap. Yeah. However, to swap on 1inch, like ETH to USDC, you have to do like 4 token approvals for some reason. And it's like the UI is super complicated. And like one day I'm having dinner with the Uniswap guys and I'm like, why do you think 1inch like never ate your lunch? And they're just, these guys are just bad at product. Like they just never figured out. They have a great like execution engine, but they just like never really figured out the product side. And so I think it's like, it's things of this nature that I think like are weirdly very important to users. That the like super technical in the weeds. Like all I care about is application specific sequencing better than BAM is better than this. Like these people miss that like what people want is the transaction to execute quickly and like be pretty, and it's like purple ghost that looks nice.
For sure. Okay, where is Meridian's not out yet, right? I feel like I should know this, but I don't. Is Meridian an app yet or no? And when will it be an app? Oh, I should say this. By the way, side note, disclosure, I am an investor in your company. I just like totally forgot. That's why I was laughing about. I should have said that at the beginning, but whatever. Yeah, I invested in this, but I don't know exactly what it does.
Yeah.
So
I've shelled it so hard on this podcast.
I forgot. When is Meridian an application yet, or when will it be?
Yeah, so we Meridian is now a team of 6 in SF. We have built a mobile app that has about 100 users. I think kind of mobile apps are the perfect form factor for normally finance people. They love Robinhood. Everybody uses C-Trade on their phone and these types of things. Mobile apps also are great for a personal assistant vibe, because the form factor of, hey, I have a very limited amount of screen real estate and I kind of just want you to show me the thing that's going to be interesting to me and the simplest thing. And they're very easy to navigate with chat and these types of things. So we're really into the mobile form factor here. We've also kind of separately launched a bunch of kind of public-ish features on the web. In the limit, this will be a web app that has the same login as mobile app. It'll kind of share the same backend brain as your assistant, and it will eventually will bring it to voice, so you can kind of talk to it on the phone and ask it to trade for you, and all these types of things. We'll launch it we're going to kind of take the waitlist down in September and launch it more officially. But right now it's just kind of purely in beta testing phase. It's kind of a lot of interesting and novel UX problems related to, one, how do you get the agent to reliably do the correct and well-informed things that you're asking it to do? And the second problem that has been much more interesting and much harder than I thought it would be is if you build kind of the V1 of AI cross crypto trading apps were kind of like ChatGPT, but they could swap tokens. However, you build this app, what the user sees when they log on is a chat bar and nothing else. And that is incredibly unsatisfying to a trader, because what they want to see is here's some insights, here's your portfolio, here's what happened when you were gone, here's some things you might think are interesting. And so solving this kind of proactivity problem of how do we deliver you delightful and interesting personalized insights, and then you can kind of jump into the agent flow whenever you want. That is kind of the key product problem that we've been working on all summer, and I think we'll have some interesting things to share in September.
Okay, nice. I actually wasn't going to go down this route, but now I'm a little bit curious. What is what's the model in the background, and how does this work? Also, wait, just very very naive here. Well, maybe you can explain some, but how do you I type in I want to trade 10,000 USDC for Sol. You were talking about how Axiom, there's 10 fake USDCs. Working with an LLM, right? In the background, how do you know that it's not going to go and swap for one of those 10 fake USDCs? And I mean, that's a naive example, but I'm kind of curious.
This is a great question, and this is kind of actually weirdly where all the hard stuff is. So what you want to do when you build an LLM that can do things is you want to give them access to what are called tools, and you want the tools to be very rich and very good, because the quality of the tool that the LM can use is directly proportional to how useful it is. So basically, what models we're using Gemini and GPT 4.1, and kind of we've used a little bit of the Anthropic stuff, but not as much because it's a bit too slow for us. But basically, you build these very polished tools, and what this requires is just a lot of blood, sweat, and tears of me and the team to just kind of clean the data really well. So when you're thinking about if the model searches USDC, what do you want to show? You want to show the one that has a lot of diversified trading activity, has a lot of holders, has a lot of other heuristics that we've come up with to show you that it's a real asset and not a fake asset. And if there's any ambiguity, what the model should do is say, hey, you wanted to buy dog coin. Here are 2 options. Here's a nice way to compare them. Can you just tell me which one you want? Because I'm not totally sure. Or if you say something that's slightly ambiguous, instead of the model saying oh, you said buy 1,000 Sol. Do you want to buy $1,000 of Sol or 1,000 Sol? It should ask a nice clarifying question to say that you can select. So you're balancing this trade-off of the model's tools should be smart enough so that it can genuinely search things and act agentically, but then also it shouldn't just always fire, because that's a little bit too scary for people.
Yeah. Okay. I just realized I'll have to have you back on in the future to talk about AI. We've mainly talked about dark AMMs. But okay, well, one last question on the AI vein. What do you think are the legitimate use cases of AI intersection of crypto, AI X crypto, and what are like the obvious right now like scams? I'm not asking you to call out specific companies. I'm asking you like the narratives that are legit versus the narratives that are like, so for example, a trading wallet LLM. Okay, seems like, yeah, maybe complicated on the back end, but like it seems straightforward. That could be useful. What do you think is stuff that is useful now? And then what do you think is stuff that's just like, dude, that's not there yet? Like that sounds very, very
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the interesting thing that's going on in the AI space, just to take a step back, is actually a lot of the AI companies that are getting built are more B2B. They're basically going into a business and saying like, hey, how can I automate this like accounting function for you? And if you talk to the random 24-year-old Stanford kids that are out here in SF, the thing that they're doing is trying to figure out like, what is a problem in healthcare that can be automated with AI? They're not thinking about like, how do I provide a really interesting consumer use case to people?
Yeah.
So from my perspective, there is kind of a clear or interesting consumer use case for AI. Cursor is an example of this. And ChatGPT is an example of this, like agentic web search, making videos, blah, blah. There's cool consumer use cases. And the real value of this stuff is like, over time, people are just going to interact more with agents and less with like static websites. And they're just going to be kind of, everything's going to become a little bit more generative, a little bit more personalized, a little bit smarter. Like you just want to interact with something that feels a little bit smarter than an old fashioned UI. And even nowadays, if you are on Slack, like Slack will summarize a Slack thread for you and you can like chat with it or whatever. So I think this is like a clear, legitimate use case. I think the thing that popped up this spring that's like clearly kind of stupid is people would build like a LangChain SDK in Rust or something, and then they'd slap a token on it and be like, AI16Z is a framework. And you'd be like, what? This is just like a GitHub repo that's like got a bunch of slop in it. And it's like, what is the value of this? Like, it shouldn't be worth $2 billion, obviously. Or like the AI launch pads, like virtuals, like that's clearly, it's just a launch pad. It should be valued as a launch pad, not like an AI launch pad. So these types of things I think are kind of useless. And then I think the stuff that's like perfectly, totally unclear if this is going to be useful, I would lean on the side of it's probably going to get outcompeted, but potentially could be useful is distributed training with token, maybe. So like I'm into like Noose Research, these types of businesses where they're like, oh, we can build this distributed network of GPUs and we can incentivize people. Like that could work. I think for the most part, centralized businesses just dominate decentralized businesses in these spaces, and it's like totally on the decentralized business to prove any value here. And the last one that's popping up recently is there's this huge trend in AI, which is these models are like incredibly data hungry. And so there are these firms that basically go out and they source a ton of data for the LLMs. And they make hundreds of millions, billions of dollars of revenue, basically like selling data to AI firms like OpenAI, Anthropic, whatever. So obviously like the people who invented DeepIn thought like, wait a second, this is kind of like DeepIn. What if we just give people tokens and they generate data? Again, centralized systems that can ensure high quality data and go out and proactively source people and stuff seem like they're probably going to outcompete decentralized data collection algorithms, but it's not like obviously cooked. It's just like, I'd probably think that they're going to get outcompeted.
That makes sense. All right. Well, I'll have you back on at some point. We can go all into the intersection of crypto and AI.
Talk about the $100 million meta offer that you got last week to be an AI researcher.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. All right. Well, where can people find you? And also Meridian. Is it Meridian or Meridian Labs? Wait, is Meridian the name of the app or no?
Meridian is the name of the company and the name of the app. You can find me at BQ Brady on Twitter. Or you can find Meridian at meridian.app. So
awesome.
Please check it out. We'll announce more in September. Thanks, Gwart.
All right. Thanks for coming on. Yeah.
Thanks for having me.